Good morning. We are on page 418 in the Maimer, the discourse of the Mittler Rebbe, page 418. It's in the book called Maor AdHamtz Bereishis, the Maimorim of the Mittler Rebbe Bereishis, Chanukah Maimer, page 418. Okay. We come back to now, back to the beginning of the Maimer, which also leads us back to Ayin Beis, because Ayin Beis was discussing this in detail, how a candle is made up of three parts, three components, namely the wick, the oil, and the flame, or the light that it creates. And what he says briefly, this word ner is by ner Hashem nishmas adam and ner mitzvah. He's not talking about ner Hashem nishmas adam, that the soul, the divine soul, nefesh halikis, is the wick, which is inserted into the oil, which is the intelligence of the animal soul, with a kavanah, with the intention that the divine soul, through its avodah, through its work, and through its contemplation, its bonus, like he says in Shema, Yichudei Lo, Seva Mala, should affect and educate and train and harness and ultimately transform the animal soul, instead of it using its intelligence for behemoth things, like for the desires that the behemoth wants for its own needs and its own desires, its own survival, that it should be used and directed to fuel that is completely consumed and transformed and absorbed by the wick into creating a oir of Ahaftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, a love for God, a love and reverence for God, like he said, and furthermore that it should become oir, Torah oir. It should elevate all the way to the level of Torah, which is the oir atzmi, that is not affected by tzimtzum at all. So even the nefesh habamis is also elevating to that state, what he calls the mo'ir. Not just the oir, but the mo'ir, because since you're transforming darkness to light, that comes from even a higher place than the Torah oir itself, the transformation. Similar to what we learned earlier about Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebiksav. Now he's talking about it in the context of nefesh halikis and nefesh habamis. Okay. And this is the oir of Torah, that's begala everything. And then, and then the part that we learned yesterday was, and how does this happen? How is this affected? This doesn't happen on its own. This is through the mamutza, the human being, shuhu adam, the shama essentially, ha'machaber umamshich l'gira ein sev b'teira er. That when we are asik, when we are involved, immersed, exert and invest ourselves. I keep looking for the word asik, is like a word, exert ourselves with effort in learning Torah, learning those words, the letters of Torah, and calling them out, reading them and learning them. It's like calling the names of Hashem. So we are, by doing that, we're drawing nimshach erein sof be'er de Torah, the Esis Halalu, in these very words, and these letters and words that we're saying, we're uttering. Dvar Hashem zu halacha, and same thing with the Mikra, Sheshena v'Keda, that when a person reads and learns and reads, that Eibus to himself comes to join you and Keda v'Shena Kenegde. So corresponding to you, it's like having a chavrusa where Hashem responds and reciprocates through learning as well. So you see from this is the human being affecting and drawing that Erein Sof down below, into Torah down below. Kol moitze pi havai de Torah yichya adam. Shu hanefesh halikis. Moitze pi havai, is the of Torah. This is how what it energizes the person. Shu hanefesh halikis. So you see here that it goes both ways. The nefesh halikis, the neshama, draws down the Erein Sof, and it in turn also energizes the neshama. So we see from this nimsa shenefesh halikis, that the divine soul that shemiskasheres, that binds itself, like we said, the three knots, it binds itself to the tzirufia asis, to the different combinations of the letters of the Torah, is called a mamutza lechaber Erein Sof b'Torah, to connect Erein Sof and Torah And to elevate, going back to the original point, if the animal soul, it should elevate the Eir Eliki, Hazeh Shenechaz Bepsila. To elevate in this Eir Eliki, the light that is being created through the wick, the divine soul, that's Nechaz Bepsila. That light is holding on to the Psila, the wick, which is the divine soul, and that's the Eir Ein Sof, that's Meir Eirat the Teira. Okay. Then we began the next section. He now taking the verse that the two verses he used earlier and says this is also the verse Ki ata teir neri, that you Hashem you illuminate, you ignite my candle. That through the Eir of Teira, shebeir ma be'eir ein sof, shemeir ba be'eir ein sof. That's the divine soul. Havaya gir choshbi is referring the second verse that Havaya ve'Havaya illuminates the darkness, my darkness. That's talking about the koloyin of the nefesh habamis, the consumption and the dissolving or absorption of the animal soul through ava v'yira and bittul v'mitzias b'chol avavcha, transforming the cheshech of klipas nega to eir, which comes from even a higher place, all the way from the Maor of Ein Sof Atzmei, that's higher than the level of eir. That's where we're up to. Bottom of page 418. So now I'll continue inside. Continue learning here. Like I said, the parentheses are there, but we'll just read them just as one flow, and maybe afterwards I'll try to figure out where a parenthesis begins, where it ends. Okay. So now that we introduced, and this is already a theme that I said several times, Oir and Maor. Let's clarify this, just spell it out in detail. He used it several times already. So in Oir itself, we've learned there's several levels. Oir is Gili, revelation, expression. Like the Oir, when I'm communicating to you now, it's a form of Oir. When the sun is giving off light, it's a form of Oir. But Oir itself has so many different dimensions. Earlier, we learned there's two dimensions in Oir. An Oir that comes in and radiates and shines into darkness. And there's an Oir that's Oir Atzmi, which is Torah. That is not affected by darkness, it's higher than darkness. He called that Oir Atzmi. An Oir Atzmi that reflects the Mahuz Va'atzmos of Elokus, of godliness. But Oir, even the highest level of Oir Atzmi, is still called Oir. It's called light. Light at the end of the day has a source. The source is Hashem, the Maor. So even though we don't define God by calling him a luminary, but he is the source of light. He's just not defined as the source of light. The sun has nothing else but being a source of light. It was created in order to give light, to illuminate the world. But Hashem, we don't call him Maor, but he is, at the end of the day, he is the source for the Oir, including even the Oir Atzmi, not just lower levels of Oir. But generally speaking, once you're talking Torah Eir, you're talking about an Oir Atzmi. It's a very high level, because it's like he said before, Ma, Ayin, complete bottle. All it is a complete channel for godliness. That's what Torah is. It has nothing else. That's why it could actually be such a conduit, such a transparent channel for Elokus. That's why it's not subject to any concealment, because it is very much part of the core source where nothing can be concealed. It is a cheshech layachshech. No darkness can conceal it because it's beyond that. Okay. But the fact is now, since the kavanah of, now here comes the next piece. Since the kavanah of the whole thing is not just to shine. The kavanah is not just Oir. Oir is beautiful, it's God's expression. Great. But he wants that expression to come down into the lowest of worlds, in Tachteinim. Tachteinim means ultimate hell and Vehester. That's what it means, Tachteinim. The lowest of worlds means complete concealment. So we're not just talking about shining light, we're talking about now entering into a world of concealment, our world, where things are not clear, where things are not, where things are confused, where things can be even corrupt and actually be antithetical to light, where there's much darkness. Cheshach kafla mechupel klippus and smali klippus and sitra achra. And that the Torah should have an impact there. Obviously, through a neshama, that also comes down below and uses Torah Eir, by learning Torah, to illuminate this world, but not just illuminate, transform the darkness. So now the question is, if Torah is Torah Eir Atzmi, good, it's not subject to darkness, how do you transform darkness? You could say, fine, like you said, it enters the darkness, and the darkness is not, it cannot withstand the Eir of Torah, because Torah is Eir Atzmi. No darkness can cover it. If you reveal Torah, it automatically would dispel any darkness. No problem. But then the darkness is dispelled. We want more than that. We want V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, that also the nefesh, dark nefesh habamis, should love God. Not just that it should be nullified or eliminated or neutralized. You want it to be transformed. And the same thing with the world below. We want the world to be transformed into Adira b'tachtein. Not just saying, oh, okay, we've won the war by eliminating all the darkness, and now only the light of Torah shines. We want the very world to recognize Torah, and it itself should be saturated with the light of godliness and Torah. So that you have to go deeper now, back to the source, even higher than Torah. You have to go to the Maor. That's the Noach Chilisem B'Seifon. That, because that's the intention in the highest levels. Why did Hashem, in the first place, send the Torah to this world? Why is he even creating a Torah? It's not just because he wants to express himself, but he wants it to transform the world. So now we need to invoke and reach and access that Noach Chilisem B'Seifon. In the beginning is wedged in the end, or he said earlier, Seif Maisa, B'machshavat Chila, that the end of the process, meaning in this world, in Maisa, Seif Maisa, all the Machshavat Chila, higher than even Torah is. So that's what we're drawing from. Now, earlier when he explained it in Torah itself, you also have these two levels, Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. But that's still in Torah. Still in Torah, that Torah Shebal Peh is what translates Torah Shebiksav and develops it into a working document, a working blueprint that you can then go ahead and transform this world. Remember, Torah Shebiksav alone is too vague or too cryptic or too brief. So Torah Shebal Peh in Torah itself is this level we're talking about. But then there's the next step, actually implementing it. We didn't talk about mitzvahs yet, but we're talking now about nefesh elikis, nefesh habamis, that when you implement it and affect the nefesh habamis, you're reaching a vavai yagia choshchi. Not just ata te'er neri. Ata te'er neri means you, God, are igniting, you're illuminating my candle, my soul. That's the empowerment of the divine soul. The next step is that it should now illuminate the darkness. And that's already entering into the dark world of the Nefesh Habamis. And that transformation is a process that comes from Mokim Gavoya Yeser, the Maor of Ein Sof. He'll soon say it again. He said it earlier. This is like an example of tshuva over tzaddikim. Tzaddikim are mamshech eir, tremendous levels of eir, high levels of eir atzmi, but they don't have the power to transform darkness, at least not on their own, without additional strength. That's why it says Mashiach will cause tzaddikim to do tshuva. But about tshuva, who began his life in darkness and unfortunately transgressed his doinus, even deliberate transgressions, when that person does tshuva, you're accessing a level that's higher than light, because now you need to transform darkness. So Torah on its own, like he said earlier, there's not a chidush Torah shebiksav, he said, because it's illuminating darkness. The chiddush is to transform darkness. That's a new thing. He said that very clearly on top of page 412. He was talking there about Torah shebiksav, Torah shebal peh, but he said basically that idea. But then, meaning coming from the Torah shebal peh, and here like the transformation of the animal soul, yesh chiddush gomor, that the cheshech atzmei is transformed. Now, just for the record, I want to just be thorough. We have learned that there's even a deeper level than that. This is still through light. It's still at the end of the day, like when he spoke about the three levels of sweetening the gvura, sweetening the severities, there's the first level where you bring enough sweetness that neutralizes and overrides the bitterness. You can bring another level where you actually transform the bitterness, but it's still coming from the sweetness. And then finally is the gvuras atzma, that the bitter itself becomes sweet. That's through distress, what we learned hitting rock bottom. That was the helam ha'atzmi that comes from the ultimate momata l'mayla. I don't think he's talking about that here. I know he's not talking about that here. Here he's talking still a momata l'mayla that's within the range, because we're talking about a nefesh elikis influencing a nefesh habamis. We're not talking about the nefesh habamis alone being awakened because it feels so dark and it feels so low. That's a whole other thing. That is like the ultimate of Einoid, which it's clear is not talking about here. Here he's talking in the context of Torah and the context of a neshama. So therefore, there's still one more level in that transformation. But in between, there's this level that we're not just shining a light into the darkness, we're actually transforming the darkness, but it is coming from the Nefesh Elokis, and it is coming from Torah, and this axis is the level of Maor. And that's why he most likely doesn't use the word Hela Ma'atzmi. We'll get back to that later as well when we tie it all together. I just wanted to mention it because it just jumps out at you when you're learning this, and you wonder where's that fit in. But the Rebbe Rashab made it clear. I pointed out several times, 9 base, that's another Inyan altogether. It's another Inyan. And if you want to see, I mentioned it on page right before 1349, I believe. On page 1349, when he says, it's just a very key line that I remain. He says, he calls it an inyan b'fnei atzmei. It means that's a whole other direction, because there you're going completely starting from a place of tremendous distress, where the darkness itself evokes something, because it just cannot deal with its distance, or with its pain, or with its thirst. But here we're talking about hamshach b'seidah v'adraga de'aveda shebederach mamata l'mayla. Here we're talking about more in the orderly way. V'yadaita v'ayolikim the hashach le'el elemis. I'm reading at the bottom of page 1349. Anyway, just that, if you couldn't follow, if you didn't follow what I just said, leave it be. I will elaborate a lot more later. I just wanted to say it for the record as we're addressing these issues here. Okay. Unless someone has a question, I'll be ready to continue, but I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
An example of that would be if the Nefesh HaBahamis itself were to object to the darkness, that would be like the body getting sick.
No, I would say it would be like an addict hitting rock bottom and his whole life falls apart and there's no way to go. So that finally wakes him up to do something. That would be.
But it still has Nefesh Elokis telling him, I can't do this anymore. It's not his body talking.
That's why I don't want to elaborate here. It's a whole discussion. I could tell you where to look. It's a nefesh. That's not the Nefesh Elokis. It's the Nefesh Habamis feeling. It's like somebody who hits rock bottom, and just is a point where they see that their darkness is so deep they just have to do something about it. Is there Nefesh Elokis involved? It could be, but it's being driven not by the Nefesh Elokis saying Shema and contemplating on the divine and helping educate the animal soul. It originates from the animal soul. Maybe the Nefesh Elokis is involved because the animal soul's distress caused the Nefesh Elokis to awaken as well. But here we're talking where it all comes down with what's where's it originating from? What's the catalyst? So here we're talking about the catalyst is the Nefesh Elokis, Torah, but it's affecting the animal soul to the point that the animal soul gets transformed to want to love God and loving God. That's what he's talking about here. That rock bottom is a whole different experience. That's why he calls it an inyan b'fnei atzmei. I don't know if you were with us when we were learning this earlier, but if you want to know the pages in Ayin Beis where that's discussed, it's to find it right now.
So you mentioned earlier 13.
No, I mentioned 1349. That's the end of the discussion. It begins when he speaks probably 1325. That's where he talks about the third level of sweetening the darkness, sweetening the severities from the severities themselves, 1325. But you have to learn it in context, because earlier he talks about, as I said, is it the sweetness that's neutralizing or sweetening the bitter, or is the bitter itself feeding? Examples would be homeopathy, antibiotics, anywhere where the poison itself, the toxin itself becomes perfume, where you can take a perfume from that when you remove the toxic smells and that are unpleasant, you get a beautiful flume. He talks there about the ketores, the different spices that were used in the Beis Hamikdash, all examples where Toxins itself feed the healing, basically.
Thank you.
Why,
Like tshuva,
you said,
tshuva as opposed to a tzaddik.
I wanted to ask us a different question. So were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
You said we don't call the Eberster a Maor. Why not? He's a source of light.
Because you
He
can't
is a
define the
luminary.
Eibishter by being a source of light. That's not the main thing of the Eibishter. A sun you can define as being a source of light. He is also a Maor. He's also the source of light, but that cannot be his definition. There's my Maor. We learned about this as well in Ayin Beis and other places. Just that Maor is not a sufficient identity of his. That's what it says. You can't say the loize ikra lekus that he gives off light, whereas the ikra of the sun is to give off light. That's its whole purpose. That's
No,
the
I
only
understand. I'm not saying that's his essence.
That's why the Chassidus says you can't call him a Maor, because you can't call him by any type of a Maor would be a limitation, would be saying, okay, God is the source of light. The light comes from him, but you can't call him a Maor. That's the point.
Okay, thank you. You answered really well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's continue now. In the bottom of the page, 3 lines from the bottom of 418. Uke'inyan sha'amar. Now that he brought Maor the Ein Sof, Maor sheba machzira lemutav. So this Maimar Chazal was brought earlier. And I see they're not saying it earlier, but it was brought a little while back. So let's first explain what it means. It says it's talking about Torah, and it says that when a person wanders off, God forbid, so the Maor Sheba, the Maor within Torah will draw him back, Machzir Lemutav, will cause him to return to the good path. The expression is Maor, not Oir. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that, why sometimes we use the word Maor, but you see it's used in the context of returning him to good. Not just talking about illuminating, talking about a transformation from darkness to light. U'kamoy shemen l'moyer, like it says in the pasuk, oil l'moyer. Here again, it could have said shemen l'oyer, oil to be used for light. It says l'moyer. Sheyeir min hamoyer atzmei. Because the point is not just that you should have the light, that the light should shine from the moyer itself. Notice the language of Chassidus, oyer is a very high level, but you want sometimes to access the source of the light. Like there are times, for instance, as much as sunlight is powerful, the sun is even more powerful. So he's saying, Sheyer er min hamoyer atzmei. That's what you're looking for. V'nimtza, what do we learn from this? Kiloyin hashemen, it could be at the end. By the way, the words hamoyer atzmei, maybe after that should come the end of this small parenthesis. Possible. Now that I'm reading it, because you don't have an end to this parenthesis either. I'm just trying to find the end. Maybe it goes right after the word sheyer min hamoyer. So in other words, moyer sheba Hashem l'moyer is like part of the parentheses. But the main point is this: v'nimtza, because I see it from the word v'nimtza seems to be like a concluding statement from what he said earlier. So he's like bringing it all together. And what do we derive from this? What do we draw out from this? Nimtza kiloyin hashemen zeh l'moyer shalamayla min ha'er. That the kiloyin hashemen, that the consumption or you can say the absorption, as the shemen, what's the word? The shemen depletes, the depletion of the oil is all the way to the moyer, shemen l'moyer. That's the meaning. Shemen l'moyer shalamayla min ha'er. That's higher than the oil. So shining light is oil. But when the depletion of the shemen, or the consuming of the shemen, which we know refers here to the animal soul or to the darkness, that's to the moyer, not just l'mayla min ha'er, which is higher than oyer, but who mocker kol oyer the Torah mitzvahs. And this is the mocker for the oyer of Torah mitzvahs. Now, below he says that in some manuscripts it just says the Torah. because he's not talking about mitzvahs here. He's talking mainly about Torah. But it does say in one manuscript Torah mitzvahs. In some of the manuscripts it says Torah mitzvahs. I don't know how much you can read into that, because at the end of the day, Torah and mitzvahs do go together, and there's Ner mitzvah and Torah. So I don't want to analyze that because it's just two different manuscripts. But he says it's the makar of Torah mitzvahs, because the makar before Torah mitzvahs comes the Maor. But who accesses the Maor is when you do the transformation. Without that, Torah would be sufficient. If you're talking about someone who never wandered off, and you're not talking about transforming the oil or the darkness to light, you may not need to access the Maor. It doesn't mean you can't, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't, because even tzaddikim, even people living in the light, also want to connect to the source itself. But the place where it compels us to go there, you can only go there through the darkness. I mean, to use Einstein's terms, you can't fix a problem from within the system where the problem was created. How are you going to do tshuva on something when you transgress Torah? How could Torah correct that? That's why it says in Medrash that when they asked on Hashem, how are you going to heal? How are we going to find kapara, atonement, after a sin? Torah can't give you that, because Torah tells you to do what Hashem wants. That's why we have tshuva that's even deeper than Torah, because you need to go beyond the so-called regular system of Torah to be able to access forgiveness. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to be on the mountain for 80 days, and he had to evoke the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachman from Hashem. Why couldn't he just say, we have Torah because now you did a tremendous sin. The building of the golden calf is Yarek Val Yaver, one of the cardinal sin that you're supposed to die for before idol worship. And that's what happens. So here Moshe had to go dig deeper. It's just like when you in personal relationships. You can have a couple, beautiful couple, they love each other, but if one of them betrays the other, it's not just enough to say, hey, let's forget about it, let's just move on. Now you have to dig deeper, because you need to get forgiveness. You need to prove yourself that you're not going to do it again. You have to rebuild trust. Rebuilding trust is not just saying, let's erase yesterday. It means now you have to dig deeper and draw out from yourself a deeper love, a deeper commitment, both in yourself and in your partner. That requires going deeper. So whenever you go into a darker place, you need to go deeper into the source. In this case, he's calling that the Maor Sheba, the Shemen La Maor. The Shemen La Maor Shalamayla Mina Mokar Kol Ha'er de Torah Mitzvahs. So sometimes in language of Chassidus, it's not enough to follow Hashem's Ratzon, you need to go to the Baal HaRatzon. Ratzon tells you, Hashem says, I want you to do these mitzvahs, follow this Torah. Once you defied God's will, you now have to go back to the Baal HaRatzon, the one who willed it in the first place. It's like a melech passed a decree, and you transgressed the decree. You can't just say, hey, I transgressed, okay, I regret it. You now have to go back and ask for mercy from the king, from the one who made the decree in the first place. So that's all about going back to the mocker, so to speak, of Torah mitzvahs. V'zeu shekasav. And this is the meaning of the pasuk, V'havai yegiach choshchi. B'vav neisefes. Remember the vav neisefes. Earlier I said he used it on Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now he's using it on this transformation of the animal soul. V'havai b'vav neisefes. V'havai yegiach choshchi. That's the addition of that pasuk. Not just havaya. V'h. A vav neisefes means you're getting an additional power here. Similar to what we spoke about, af asisiv, that rebesa, it's an additional v'havaya. V'yonisha shalamayla me'er de Torah. So havaya itself would refer to Torah. V'havaya, by yegiach choshchi, you're reaching the vav, the davar nesev, which is what he's calling here the Maor. U'kamay inyan bal tshuva. The next page, 419, like he's bringing another example, like the inyan of a bal tshuva. What is a bal tshuva doing that a tzaddik cannot do? That they transform the darkness of utter evil, of utter negativity, to light. That's greater than the perfect tzaddikim. Shehu ba'or de Torah mitzvahs mitam zeh. I'm not sure what he means. The Eir of Torah mitzvahs sounds like that it's greater than Tzaddikim G'delim, that are the Eir of Torah mitzvahs. but this is higher than that. Why? Because it's coming and transforming the darkness, which Tzaddikim Gemurim are not doing. I think that's the way you have to read it, because it says the Torah mitzvahs. But who inyan Torah Shebal Peh? Now he connects it to what we learned earlier in Torah itself. This is the inyan of Torah Shebal Peh. Shemavar cheshech le'er mamata l'mayla kanal. Obviously, that's in Torah itself. So that's the Torah Shebal Peh, which also does that. It enters into a dark world, addressing issues of corruption, of truth and lies, and entering the what we call it, the muck, entering that world, clarify and give us and bring a clarity to what you're supposed to do in a dark world. That's mavada mamata lamayla, from the bottom up, in contrast to Torah Shebiksav. So he compared that also to this. He's comparing it. It's obviously not the same level exactly, but it's like what he says is that the inyan of Torah Shebal Peh, similar to what we learned earlier about transforming it from the darkness. Okay, and with that he concludes this theme. There's going to be now another section, which is yet another parentheses. This one does have a beginning and an end, I believe. Actually, no. There's another one at the end. Okay, but this is clearly a new parentheses, which is another subject. First, let me stop here for questions. So that's what he's added here. So what have we learned in this whole section? The following. One point, first of all, is that let's just get back. That the neshama is the wick that influences and trains and harnesses the oil of the animal soul to love God instead of itself. That's point number one. I'm just going over summing up this paragraph. Okay. And where is it? It's point number two. And the heichan hu chala. Where is this, the depletion or the consumption of the oil? It's called a v'nichel ba'er zev er teira. It doesn't just elevate and becomes light. You could say it becomes like an er Hashem nishmasad, like the candle of the soul. No, it becomes teira er, all the way to the highest levels of teira er, which are not subject to tzimtzum at all. That megala, like he said, er ein sof atzmei, the etzem of the er ein sof. Point number three is omnam kol zeh. I'm sorry, omnam ein gili zeh. This gili comes through the human being, the neshama, that learns Torah and reads Torah, and therefore draws the Ein Sof into Torah by reading and bringing HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yeshiv V'Sheina Kenegdei. And finally, point number four, sees the mamutza. That's the mamutza. That's like the wick, the mamutza of the soul, the human being, drawing the oil and creating this oil, the Ein Sof of Torah, or drawing the Ein Sof of Torah. And finally, the final point is what the Nefesh HaBamis adds. That there's the final point. The Nefesh HaBamis adds a whole other dimension. The mention of Maor, of reaching the source of the light itself, because you're transforming darkness to light. Not just Ata Te'er Neri, but Avai Yagir Choshchi. The Maor transformation. So you have here 4 key points, which we've learned earlier, and also the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. I just wanted to organize it here. And that's where we're up to now on the top of page 419. But I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask any questions.
So I just want to ask or just comment. So the Nefesh HaBehemis, it requires something that even goes beyond its own neshama. You're saying like that it's drawing the Maor, which is beyond the beyond.
I just gave many examples. When there's a betrayal between two people who love each other, you're going to have to go beyond the normal love to access forgiveness and to rebuild trust and relationship.
So that's where the animal soul is actually pushing past its boundaries. You're saying?
No, I would say it otherwise. I'd say the animal soul is when it's being transformed, you need more strength than when you're just shining light.
Mm-hmm. But the animal soul has an inherent greater strength, right? Doesn't it? in a
Well,
sense.
we learned earlier that the greatest strength comes from Tohu, which is higher than Tikkun. It has an intensity that is part. He's not mentioning that really here,
Yeah.
but but separately, that's correct. I mean, what I just said is enough. Why do you need to? I mean, what you're saying is correct, but why are you pushing that? Just the mere fact that you need to transform something that was broken needs more strength than building it in the first place.
I'm not questioning.
That already is enough. That's really what he's saying here, that you're
Okay.
reaching that. There's another thing, that the animal soul does have an intensity, and that's why the shemen, the fuel, adds more light than the wick does. That's another discussion, which is an extension of this. He's not mentioning it here explicitly. We did learn this earlier, and we learned it in the other Maimarim. So it's correct. But remember, but that's like a point number two. Point number one is the mere fact that you need to transform darkness needs to come from a deeper strength. The fact, another thing is, darkness does have a certain innate, or in this case, the animal soul has an innate power that is stronger, and that's why it can create light more than the wick itself.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Because it's rooted. Remember, the animal soul is rooted in a very high divine level. It just falls down in a much lower place. That's why animals are physically stronger than humans. That's what it says. Because they come from a deeper level, but it has to be harnessed. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? No? Well, let's continue. So now, in the inimitable style of the Mittler Rebbe, he's going to add another point to all of this, which is connected to what we've learned earlier, but it's going to take us all for a little spin here. Let's see. So he says now like this. I'm on the third line on page 419. V'zehu, and this is what it says, Ani havaya lo Shonisi, v'atem Bnei Yisroel lo Chilisem. So there's a pasuk. The pasuk is in Malachi Gimel Vav. I God I am God, immutable, never changing. Lo Shonisi. V'atem Bnei Yisrael, and you, the children of Israel, lo Chilisem, will never be annihilated. Chilisem from the word kiloin, never be eliminated or annihilated, never disappear. Now, just before we continue reading, you may remember Aniyah violation Nisi was used in the context of Ayur Atzmi, that's not subject to change. That there's an air that goes through changes. But there's Aniyah Shem Leishanisi is the place where there's no difference between Elokus before creation and after creation. Certain immutable state. So it's not the first time he's bringing Aniyah Shem Leishanisi. Just wanted to point that out. Okay. So now he's explaining this pasuk. Shehu kematmiya. This pasuk is coming like wondering. Ima niavaya le shehu. Ima niavaya. If I, God, shubchinas moir lamayla me'or d'shem avaya shebeteira mitzvahs. Le shanisi klal. So who I, Hashem, the Moir above, which is above the Oir of Shem Havaya. Remember, Havaya is Oir. The Havaya with the Vav is the Moir. L'mayla for Shem Havaya Shabbatain, which is Lo Shanisi Kla. I'm not sure exactly what he's saying, so let me read on, and then we'll try to figure out the context here. K'matmiya imani Havaya, shubchinis Moir l'mayla me'er de Shem Havaya. The Masha'er, the Torah Meir, Gam B'Cheshach Elyon, because the fact that the light of Torah radiates in the Cheshach Elyon, the Tzimtzum above, the darkness above, Zeu Kamei B'Chinas Shinui V'Dover Mechudash Min Ha'atzmi is the Ein Sof. That's like a Shinui, a change, and like a new something novel, something was Dover Mechudash, something new happened here. Mina atzmi is the Ein Sof. Kamesha Kasav Yehi Oyer. like the pasuk says here, let there be light. What does that mean? That before that there was no light. So that's a shinui, from darkness to light. To radiate the darkness. The kodim sheher oyer, and before this light shined, there was darkness and concealment. So if you're talking about the regular level of Havaya, there is a shinui. The shinui that first God created at Tzimtzum, we learned this earlier, God's power to conceal, and then came light afterwards. That's a shinui. But that's in the shinui, that's in the levels of light and darkness. Avol, b'muhusiv atzmusei. But in the core essence, which he calls Maor, meaning higher than this oir, b'muhusiv atzmusei ein sof shenikra Maor, or muhus va'atzmus ein sof, which is called the Maor, the source of light, harikamei k'chashecha ke'era. Before him, for him, darkness and light are equal. Bli shinui klal, without any change, because he's above the entire concept of light and darkness. In other words, in a world of light, you can have the light, you could have a concealment of the light, and then you could have the light pierce the darkness, and there's shifts and changes in the status. When you're talking about a level that's beyond darkness and light, you don't have any of that. It's completely immutable. Shonisi. That's why darkness does not conceal, does not darken anything at all, unequivocally no. And you don't need to shine light, litches, to dispel, ulasalik, and remove hacheshach, the darkness. You only need that in a state which is subject to darkness. It would be like somebody who sees in the dark. He doesn't need a light to shine. It's for someone who doesn't see in the dark. So it's dark, so you need to shine a light. But for a level that's beyond all that, like we learned earlier, it's completely beyond darkness and light. You don't need any of that. Ulakach, and therefore, gam chesher the klipas nega. This was talking about the tzimtzum above. Now he's going to the chesher klamata. Also, the darkness of klipas nega, of the radiant klipa of the husk. Ein cheshach mi kare klal. Before him, before Mahusiv Atzmusei, is not dark at all. From the outset, it's never darkened. The whole concept of a klippa is only from the point of view of someone living in the world that is affected by that. You know, when you look at a shell, you don't see the fruit inside. But from the Abish to Mahusiv Atzmusei's point of view, by him, the shell and the fruit are all equal. So it's like there's no covering altogether. So mikore. And you don't even need, and you don't need the Torah to illuminate. He has in the bracket is another manuscript. Because without that, it's hard to read in the Shama. You don't need the light of Torah or the light of Neshama to radiate, because you're reaching a place that's beyond it all. So now he goes back to the pasuk. So this is what the pasuk is coming to give us, the chiddush of this pasuk. V'zeu shematmiya. And that's what he wonders. I have to go back how the pasuk is read. I'm not sure why it's a wonder. Aniyah violation isi. Maybe it's written in a lashon bitmiya. I, God, do not change. V'atam Bnei Yisroel lo Chilisem. And you do not. Is he like he's equating Bnei Yisroel, just like Hashem does not change? Bnei Yisroel, you cannot extinguish, you cannot annihilate, you cannot eliminate. Let me read and see what he says. I'm not sure that the Tmiya here. That you, the children of Israel, will never extinguish the nefesh habamis. That the Mesiras Nefesh of the sacrifice of the animal soul, which we called before Kiloyin, Chilisem, B'shnei Yitzarecha, when you're loving God with both sides of the heart, the Nefesh of the Kis, Nefesh Habamis, Lafer Gam Cheshech Le'er, to transform also darkness to light, The ein sorach leze'er the nefesh halikis ve'er the Torah ukahai gavna. And you don't need for this the light of Torah or the light of the nefesh halikis or the light of Torah. So he's definitely going a deeper level than what we spoke earlier, because I said exact opposite earlier. I said that till here he was speaking about how the nefesh halikis and or Torah help achieve this goal. Now he's saying clearly that we're talking about a level that they can be transformed, and they don't need the Eir of Nefesh L'Kis and Eir of the Torah. Ela Mamela Lo Yustar. But automatically, Mamela Yustar, because it's accessing the Maor, which is higher, Muhuzvatz Musi, that's higher than darkness and light. So I think what he's saying is that the pasuk, the chiddush of the pasuk is the following: to say that Hashem lo Shonisi, that God is immutable, okay, of course, but how could you say Bnei Yisroel lo Chilisem? They're not God. Then they're human beings. I think what he's saying here, and the pasuk is coming to wonder and equate and say, yes, that's true, Bnei Yisroel in general, to Torah mitzvahs. But if you're talking about Chilisem, when they access the level of Mesiras Nefesh, of transforming their animal soul, and that level of Chilisem, then they're accessing a place that is like Lo Shonisi, like Ani Hashem, because Torah mitzvahs, well, I shouldn't say Torah mitzvahs. Oyer, like he says, the level of Oyer that is Shayach to Shini v'Chidush is a light that shines into darkness. And there's a change from before and after. Still need to understand it. Torah mitzvahs, he also said is Lo Shonisi, that it doesn't change its mahus at all. But clearly he's saying here that the koloin of the Nefesh HaBamis reaches a place in the source, in the etzem, that just defies darkness altogether. And he's saying clearly that it does not need Torah for that, and doesn't need the neshama nor Torah, which needs good explanation what that means exactly. But he's clearly saying that. I need to, like I said, this is going to take us for a spin. I need to study this a few more times to understand it well. But that's clearly what we just learned. So I read it as
it
is.
seems like the opposite
It needs plenty of explanation. I have a few thoughts on it, which I'll share. But I just want to read the last parenthesis. Might as well read till the end here. So then he says, Oi, the Rebbe adds now, Oi, Efsher, you could say it's another interpretation. The Metam Zed Ani violation Nisi. For this reason, from the reason because Hashem lo Shonisi is immutable, because Hashem is immutable, this is what it says, that the Havaya radiates the darkness, my darkness, shagam acheshech yer ka'er, that also the darkness should shine like light, ulazeh, and therefore ulazeh, and due to that, atem b'nei Yisroel, you, Bnei Yisroel, the children of Israel, shein hanashamis, lo yicholisam b'krishma. Due to that, the neshamis do not get, lo yicholisam will not become, I could say, consumed in krishma. It means you'll remain intact. You won't be completely swallowed up, completely annihilated in the light of krishma. So it's a different, this is now giving a different explanation. So this is talking about the neshamis, Bnei Yisrael, not the nefesh habamis clearly. Okay, this also needs explanation. So a few points, let me make a few points, and then if you want to weigh in, by all means. Firstly, it seems like he's going deeper than what he said till now. Because till now, he was talking about the nefesh halikis, influencing the nefesh habamis. That's what he said. The isbonus of the nefesh. The wick is causing the oil to become fuel for the light of love and Torah. However, in the process, because it's transforming the oil of the nefesh habamis, that reaches the Maor, not just oil, because there's a transformation going on from the oil to the Maor, like he said. Now he's going and saying you don't even need the Eir of Torah and the Eir of mitzvahs. I'm sorry, of neshama, because there's something about the nefesh habamis when it transforms that just goes right to a point that's higher than light and darkness altogether. So it's not about transforming the darkness. It's about a place that you're accessing there. There's no light and no dark. So there's no need. You're going to basically Ani Avai Lo Shonisi, Bnei Yisroel Lo Chilisem, that when they are transforming their animal soul, they're accessing the Lo Shonisi level. Not the Shonisi, not the level of Oyer and Cheshach as they interact with each other. Which would be initially. The Nefesh Abamis at the end of the day is a Cheshach initially, is dark. So there's a level you could say, you're coming, illuminating, like I said earlier, the Nefesh Elikis trained. It's like we're learning Chassidus now. We're educating our animal soul to understand godliness. And it's very geschmack and enjoyable. The Nefesh Abamis responds. But that's the Nefesh Elikis training the Nefesh Abamis. It seems that there's a level when the Nefesh Abamis has now been awakened that has the capacity in its kiloy and in its Mesiras Nefesh that reaches all the way a place that where there's no darkness and light in the first place. That's what it sounds like to me that this is adding. Very much like an ayin beis, the einoid that adds to the avodah, like you said. So what I said earlier about the einoid being a separate topic, it seems like this parenthesis is addressing that. I cannot say definitively and positively, but that's what it sounds like to me when I read it. Because how else are you going to explain this and consistent with what we said earlier? The last parenthesis requires its own discussion. There's definitely a different interpretation, but the question really is this: is this point of the Nefesh Abamis accessing the Maor completely independent of the Neshama and of Torah? In other words, is it simply because it hits rock bottom, and that's something, that awakening that it has when it hits rock bottom, it suddenly is able to access the highest levels, like a person who's really in the darkest place possible? Is that what he's saying? Or is it a second stage where after the Nefesh Elikis influences the Nefesh Abamis, so then once the Nefesh Abamis unleashes its true power, it has the capacity to go all the way to the place that's beyond darkness and light, which means even higher than the Oyer of Torah Mitzvahs and the Oyer of even the Neshama. I'm not sure about that. I need to read it again to see. It may not even be clear because may not give us enough information. So I'm not trying to understand what is the exact dynamic here. Like, what exactly is happening? What does it mean that the Nefesh Abamis is reaching this level without Torah and without mitzvah, without the Neshama? Does it mean that he doesn't even say hitting rock bottom here? He doesn't use the word distress. He doesn't even use the word loss or hunger or thirst, like some of the chanafshi idea, that you're so thirsty, that thirst is so intense. So I'm not sure that it's even that direction. For all I know, that's not even the correct way of looking at it. I'm just thinking out loud, to be honest. And as I said, let's figure that out, then we'll figure out the next parentheses. But I'm going to stop here. Let's hear any questions you may have. If you want to say anything, I can tell you right now, it's not clear to me. So if it's not clear to you, it's not like I have it clear yet. If you have clarity I don't have, by all means, share it. And take it away. Anybody wants to say anything, go for it.
I mean,
I'm wondering if this relates to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Robin.
no, you go. I'm not. Go ahead, please.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if this relates to. I mean, you started to allude to it, but taking it further, that the Nefesh Bahamas, which is essentially, a manifestation of Klipas Noga, is essentially, he's saying that its essence is tied, like essentially the root of the Kalim, of materiality, is in the Rishimu, which we talked about a long time ago, but that the Orients of Lifnei Tzimtzum, that the level of godliness before creation, if you will, before the creation of this world, is that the Rishim is a remnant of that Orients of Lifnei Tzimtzum, and that's the Shoresh, that's the root of the Kalim, of materiality, which is the Nefesh Bahamas, is essentially the vitality of the animal,
that's what I was referring to. That's what I was referring to when I said Einoid. Correct.
That's what I figured.
The Rishim is rooted in the Helama Atzmi. Correct. That's what it sounds. I'm saying it with caution because he doesn't say it explicitly, but it's possible that's what's being added here. The Einoid level. Yes. You just added more words to it, but that's the idea that that the kelim are rooted in the shimu, which is rooted in turn the helam atzmi, which is higher than oir.
Right.
Here he's saying even
Exactly.
higher than oir and cheshach altogether, which may be the helam, but he doesn't use the word helam atzmi, so I don't want to, equate the two. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it sounds to me that is going. That's my initial reaction when reading this. That he's going into what I said earlier, that the Rebbe Rashab says it's an inyan b'fnei atzmei. It looks like he's bringing that into the picture. That's the initial. So correct. What you said is what my thinking. That's my initial thinking. Yes.
But it's interesting because he's making it seem like it's automatic somehow. Where we just went through pages of discussion.
Well, that's why
about,
I said we need to understand the dynamic, because he's not mentioning rock bottom. If he mentioned distress, she could say
Right.
the nefesh habamis in its darkness comes to become aware of something that someone in light will never know. Like you see it all the time.
Yeah.
So, but he doesn't say it. That's the thing. So is he assuming that we'll understand that? If he said that, there would be no problem. Then that's the key. Then he says it's the distress of the nefesh habamis, and it's wandered it's so distant from God that accesses the etzem itself, the Maor. That is possible what he means, but he doesn't say it. So that's why I'm being a little careful to say, I can't say it's definitive, but it's possible.
I wonder if he's saying that it's just intrinsic. Yeah. Go ahead.
I would just say,
and I also said there's two ways to understand it. First, you begin with the nefesh halikis radiating the nefesh habamis, illuminating, and then comes this next level, or is he talking only this next? Now, for all I know, Ayin Beis, who of course the Rebbe Rashab learned this, because he's quoting and he's sourcing it. Maybe that whole piece of Bnei is based on this parentheses, for all we know. It could even be that far. So,
yeah, wouldn't that be wild?
my experience tells me I got to read it a little slower. Go back to Ayin Beis. I want to see if there are any hints and any words. It's not surprising, but the Mittler Rebbe suddenly in the parentheses at the end of a paragraph throws this at us without ever having mentioned it earlier. I don't think is even alluded to in all the pages of this Maimer earlier. So that's yet another thing. But that's not surprising. The Mittler Rebbe does that. He suddenly has, like I said, a surge of consciousness that just brings a whole new idea. Anyway, I definitely want to study and review it. And we'll get there. So it's very possible that's the pshat. Yeah. Okay.
I was just,
Go ahead, Ruam. You want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, maybe it could be both, 1 and 2. Maybe sometimes the animal soul
It is definitely both. The question is he talking about here as both or one? That's possible. Yeah. I have no doubt that it's both. In general, it's both. Question is, what is he referring to here? I have no problem saying it's both. Look, the fact is, he did say clearly the nefesh halikis. He said, look at the third line of page 418. His bonus nefesh halikis also b'seichel anushi, to the point that it causes the oil to become fuel for love of God. That's very clear. That the Shema, the contemplation of the divine soul in the Shema, that's the Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. That's for sure the theme of this Maimer. Not only the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. The question, then now he's adding another thing. I'm wondering whether this is step 2 after this, or is it its own track? But yes, it definitely could be both.
Thank you.
You wanted to add anything else? Anybody? Yitzchak, anyone else wanted to say anything?
No, just a small thing about the word Shonisi, that maybe it could mean two existent, like two realities. I, Hashem, don't have two realities, and then the Tmiha is, but he does have two realities, because you could change darkness to light and light to darkness.
I don't think that's what he's saying here. I mean, what you talk Shonisi from the word sheni as opposed to change?
Well, because sheni is kind of changed. It's kind of connected. There's a second.
Okay, I hear you. That's possible. That Shonisi, the word change refers to a duality, type of duality. And Ani Hashem doesn't have this duality because Mehus Va'atzmo is the essence, is beyond choshech and ner. It's possible. Yeah, it's possible in explaining what shinui means, which is a shift. Like he says, shinui v'davar l'chudash. And that's the shinui. Before there was darkness, now there's light. But he used the word bli shinui klal, change. Yeah, it's possible to say that.
And beyond that
want-
level of darkness and light, you don't need Torah, right? Like you don't need
Well,
Torah.
the word
Shabbat,
just to say,
okay.
ain't sarach la'er de Torah, or it says that lahoyer say. It doesn't mean you don't need Torah. You don't need the Torah to illuminate him.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm not saying to take away Torah, but I'm just saying that's how you can.
The more I read it,
Yeah.
Look, I can make a further case. I'm just being very, very careful because I like to be make sure I'm saying the right thing. But if you want me to add one more key point, which really would drive the point home beautifully, actually, if it works. You remember, the whole theme in Ayin Beis is about big part of it. He said, the light of the eye, vision. And remember, vision plays a tremendous role here, because on one hand, is where the eye needs the light of Torah, the light of the neshama, the light of leaders, the light, the einayim of the malachim, who are the supervisors, to illuminate us, because you can't see in the dark. That you definitely need that light. But then we learned that you get to the koyach atzmi of riyah, that riyah, the light, the eye, in its root,
Faculty
does not need any light. It's a seeing entity. It's just that today you need light as siyua to help us. But then there's a point where we will reach that the koyach hariyah itself will see when Mashiach comes. Einenu meiris kishemesh yireach, like he brings in Ayin Beis. So it sounds to me that this is where he's going here. That there's that level where you just connect with the etzem, and you don't need a light to illuminate your darkness because you're beyond that. You're in a place where you perceive the reality because you're not subject to the rules of dark and light. But today, that's not the case. Today, we do need light. Like I spoke about Talmud and Maisa. Today, if you don't have a Torah, how will you know what to do? We don't have that God instinct, that essential instinct to know exactly what God wants. But la'asid, when the world will be saturated and the yesh itself will feel godliness, Evan Mikir Tizak, the stone of the wall, will cry out,
right?
Meaning existence. Just like today, our bodies tell us when we're hungry. We don't need to look into a book. You don't need a light to tell you you're hungry. The whole world will know and experience godliness. The yesh hanivra will be yesh amiti. That sounds to me very strongly what he's saying here. And that's what he's adding in this process. The reason I'm being careful is because I want to think about it more. I want to make sure. And I'm ready to say it. I'm saying it. But I just like to be as correct, try to be as accurate as possible. So I just want to read a few more. I want to go back to the text in Ayin Beis. I think looking at Ayin Beis will probably give some work. If he says a few lines that maybe quoting here would really drive the point home. But I'll review it. We have a whole Pesach to study this.
I'm totally.
I want to ask
you, Rabbi.
I want to ask. Oh, sorry, Robin. Were you finished, Robin?
Yeah. No, I just said I'm waiting to hear. I'm very anxious to hear what you have to say, Rabbi, after you review it. That's all. Thank you.
I'm wondering, Rabbi, if we could, and that's not to. What I'm going to say now is really restating what you're saying. I think, but I want to ask if it's okay to say this in really simple terms, Balabatisha terms, that essentially, I'm not saying that, well, let me just spit it out, that the phrase "you can do it" comes to me, meaning it's telling the human being, you might think like, I'm just a blob, I'm a blob of material. How could I possibly rise to this highest, become godliness, transform myself into godliness? You might think, how can I possibly do it? And we say, that the Torah is near us and all these things, but this is really a function. This is really focusing on, becoming godly. And so one might think, even with Torah and even with a neshama, how could you turn this blob? Excuse my, I'm trying to be a little facetious and hyperbolic here, but into something godly. And so the Rebbe is coming here to say, no, don't forget where you come from. Don't understand that your flesh may be lowly, but its source is very high. But it's coming from the primordial light ultimately. And the question is, it can't be higher than the Shamas and Torah, but maybe he's saying that you don't necessarily need it per se, because intrinsically the goof has such a high source that yes, Torah and Neshama is going to help you get there, but you've got what it takes. You've got the right stuff. Is that a fair taich?
I think so. Yeah. I think so, yes. My answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Also, could Chilisem be like Klois HaNefesh? Like, to me, how could you not have Klois HaNefesh?
No, I think Chilisem does mean, he says Mesiras Nefesh, he uses the word. But we have to understand, what does it mean that they don't have Mesiras Nefesh? They do have Bnei Yisroel Chilisem. Chilisem sounds to me that when the Nefesh Abamis is committed to God, it doesn't disappear. That's what it sounds like, but I'm not positive. I'm not positive what that means exactly either. And then later he says, "But and the shamas leichalisam bekrishma."
How could it be that you didn't have?
And the matmiya is also the matmiya.
How could it be like knowing the Mittel Rebbe? He probably, was wondering how everybody could walk around normal and not be close and nefesh to Hashem.
Yeah, but what's the context here? That's fine. That's a nice idea, but what's the context in this mimer here? That's the question.
I think also ultimately it proves that neshamot are not a creation. They're literally part of Hashem. As obviously we've said that a million times, but that's different than a creation. So we are not separate from Hashem, and in any way, shape, or form. So at that level, once you reach that level, then you are one with Hashem. That I mean, like literally.
I don't think he's talking about that at all, because he's talking about the nefesh habamis, not about the nefesh alakis.
But nefesh habamis is part of the neshama. It's not separate from neshama.
No. In the Tanya he says the nefesh alakis is chelik alakam b'mal mamish. Nefesh habamis doesn't say that.
Well, maybe he's saying this now. That's what I'm saying.
No. But he's changing. The Tanya says that nefesh habamis is absolutely not chelik alakam b'mal mamish. And nefesh alakis is. So I don't think he's talking about that at all. No, I would not bring that here at all. That's a whole other discussion. He's not talking about whether the divine soul, the animal soul, is godly, because it's not called a godly soul, it's called an animal soul. He's saying that the animal soul, in its, in its transformation, reaches a level of the divine that's beyond light and dark, beyond the divine soul. Like in Baal Tshuva, that reaches deeper than a tzaddik. That's what he's saying here.
Is that how Eliyahu Hanavi could go up with an intact, that he was at that level, that he didn't?
I'll just tell you, the way I'm trained, I can't right now talk about other.
All right, I'm
just understand what it says here. Once we understand here, we could try to figure out how it maybe fits to other context.
Thank you.
If I can add one more thing. When you mentioned this part of Ein Beis about when we are talking about the Choshek would be lighter than the light itself. And there, exactly, at the same place in Ein Beis, we were taught that the animal soul is actually the replica of Atzmos at its root. And
one second. I got to stop you. Where does it say that animal soul is a replica of Atzmos?
We learned it in a context of light and darkness, and how at the end...
You have to show me such a thing. I cannot...
I remember it by... I remember.
Yeah, but I can tell you right now,
You just mentioned
doesn't say such
the
a thing
place.
anyway.
You just mentioned the place where you said in Iron Base might Iron Base refer to this particular place. And I remember, I don't know where is it right now because I don't have a text, but I remember that from this point, Shuva would be higher than the Torah, and Shuva would be transformed. And we were talking about that tzaddikim would do Shuva, and other people would Shuva, and it would be transformed in even higher light that we can imagine. Do you remember this place in Ayin Base when it was talking about Shuva, how it would be transferred?
I think I quoted it before when I explained this.
Yes, but there is an explanation, and you profoundly founded how Rabbi Rashab actually extract from this point to all of his teaching at that stage.
I think I reviewed that before. I cited those places in Ayin Beis about Einoid and about the Rishimo being rooted in those highest levels, the Yesh HaNivra, Yesh HaMiti. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to or not, but that's what I was talking about before.
Especially how the Hoshek would be even lighter, more bright than the light itself. When you said
we talked about that transformation.
Yes.
Yeah, I said where the bitterness itself becomes sweet. Yeah.
Yes, and there he also talked about Shuva, how it would be influenced.
So are you asking something? You're adding something?
I just
I'm not
have to confirm that you were in the right track.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so let's stop here. We have some questions. Things need to be clarified further, but we're on track, I hope, and we'll get there. So we'll stop here at the end of this paragraph, page 419. The end of the paragraph on 419. I just have to manually, because of a reason, just a second. I'll just stop the recording. Not going anywhere.